The morning sun cast long shadows across Jefferson Elementary School as Marcus Thompson adjusted his faded Army uniform one last time before stepping out of his old pickup truck. The fabric had seen better days, with patches of color worn thin from countless washes and years of wear. Small tears near the shoulder had been carefully mended, and the once crisp lines now held the soft edges of a garment that had lived through many stories. Marcus had been working as the school janitor for 3 months now, taking the night shift, to clean classrooms and hallways while the children slept. It was honest work, and he needed every dollar he could earn. His disability benefits from the Army barely covered his small apartment rent, leaving little for food and the medical expenses that seemed to pile up each month. The uniform was all he had left from his military days, and wearing it made him feel like he still had some dignity, some connection to the man he used to be. As he walked toward the school entrance, Marcus noticed the usual crowd of parents dropping off their children. Some nodded politely, others looked through him as if he were invisible. He had grown used to both reactions. What he hadn't expected was the sharp laugh that cut through the morning air like a blade. "Oh my goodness, look at that," came a voice, dripping with mockery. Marcus turned to see a woman in an expensive designer coat pointing in his direction. Her perfectly styled blonde hair caught the sunlight, and her manicured nails gleamed as she gestured toward his uniform. "Is that supposed to be military dress? It looks like something from a thrift store Halloween costume section." The woman was Sarah Whitman, mother of 2 students at Jefferson Elementary and wife of a successful businessman. She was known around the school for her sharp tongue and her belief that her family's wealth made her opinion more valuable than others. Several other parents had gathered around her, some looking uncomfortable, others nodding along with nervous smiles. "I mean, really," Sarah continued, her voice growing louder, "if you're going to wear a military uniform to work, at least have the decency to buy one that fits properly. That thing is falling apart. It's disrespectful to real soldiers who actually served our country with honor." Marcus felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. He knew his uniform was old and worn, but it was clean and pressed. He had spent an hour that morning making sure every button was fastened correctly, and every crease was as sharp as he could make it. The uniform represented years of his life, sacrifices he had made, and brothers he had lost. To hear it mocked so casually felt like a punch to the gut. "Maybe he bought it at one of those surplus stores," whispered another parent. "You know, the kind where people buy fake military gear to play dress-up." Marcus wanted to defend himself, to explain that every fade mark and worn spot on that uniform had been earned through real service, real sacrifice. But the words stuck in his throat. He had learned long ago that sometimes it was easier to stay quiet than to fight battles that couldn't be won. Instead, he lowered his head and continued walking toward the school entrance. "I just think it's inappropriate," Sarah announced to anyone within earshot. "Children look up to adults, and what kind of message does this send? That it's okay to wear tattered clothes to work? That we should accept mediocrity? My children deserve better role models than someone who can't even afford a proper uniform." The other parents began to disperse, some clearly uncomfortable with Sarah's public display but unwilling to speak up. A few lingered, enjoying the drama, but pretending to be shocked by her boldness. Marcus could feel their eyes on him as he pulled open the heavy glass door of the school. Inside the hallway, he took a deep breath and tried to shake off the humiliation. The familiar smell of floor polish and chalk dust surrounded him like an old friend. This was his sanctuary, the place where he could work in peace and feel useful again. The children who attended Jefferson Elementary had no idea that the quiet man who emptied their trash cans and mopped their floors carried so much pain, so many memories of a life that had been shattered by war. As Marcus gathered his cleaning supplies from the storage closet, he caught sight of his reflection in the window. The uniform did look tired, he had to admit, but it was all he had, and more importantly, it was real. Every thread of that fabric had been worn in service to his country, in places most people couldn't imagine, doing things most people would never have to do. He thought about the other janitor uniform hanging in his apartment closet, the standard blue shirt and pants that the school had provided for him. He could wear that tomorrow, blend into the background even more than he already did. But something in him resisted the idea. This uniform, faded and mended as it was, represented who he really was underneath the quiet exterior and the invisible wounds. The morning announcements crackled over the school's intercom system, and Marcus began his routine of checking each classroom, emptying wastebaskets and preparing for another day of keeping the school clean and safe for the children who would soon fill these halls with laughter and learning. He didn't notice the small figure who had witnessed the entire scene outside, or the way that young students' eyes had filled with tears at the cruel words spoken about the gentleman who always smiled and waved when they passed in the hallways. He didn't know that this child would run straight to the principal's office with a story that would change everything. As Marcus pushed his cart down the empty corridor, the echo of Sarah Whitman's laughter still rang in his ears. He had no idea that by the end of the day that same woman would be eating her words, and the truth about his service would be known by everyone in the school community. 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez had always been different from the other children at Jefferson Elementary. While her classmates focused on playground games and cartoon characters, Emma noticed things that others missed. She saw how Mr. Thompson, the school janitor, carefully straightened the American flag in each classroom every morning. She watched how he always paused at the memorial display in the main hallway, the one honoring local veterans, and how his eyes would get a distant look that reminded her of her own grandfather when he talked about the war. That morning, Emma had been running late because she couldn't find her favorite pencil case. Her mother had dropped her off just as the first bell was ringing, which meant she was outside when she heard the mean lady making fun of Mr. Thompson's uniform. Emma's heart had broken watching the kind man's shoulders slump as he walked toward the school building. Mr. Thompson had always been nice to Emma. When she had accidentally spilled her entire lunch tray last month, he had appeared with a warm smile and cleaning supplies, telling her not to worry because accidents happen to everyone. When she was having trouble with her locker combination, he had patiently helped her practice until she got it right. He never treated her like she was just a kid whose problems didn't matter. Emma's own father was deployed overseas with the military, and she knew how proud her mother was of his service. She had seen the carefully folded flag in their living room, the one that had covered her great-uncle's coffin when he died fighting in a place she couldn't pronounce. The idea that someone would make fun of a military uniform made her stomach feel sick and angry at the same time. Instead of going to her classroom when the final bell rang, Emma marched straight to the principal's office. Mrs. Henderson, the school secretary, looked surprised to see the usually well-behaved student standing at the counter with tears in her eyes and determination written across her small face. "Emma, honey, shouldn't you be in class?" Mrs. Henderson asked gently. "Is everything okay?" "I need to talk to Principal Davies right now," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's very important, and it's about Mr. Thompson." Mrs. Henderson had worked at the school for 15 years and had developed a good sense for when children were truly upset about something serious. She could see that Emma wasn't trying to get attention or avoid going to class. There was something urgent in the child's manner that couldn't be ignored. "Let me check if Principal Davies is available," she said, reaching for the phone. Principal Robert Davies had been running Jefferson Elementary for 8 years. He was known for his fair treatment of both students and staff, and his ability to handle difficult situations with wisdom and compassion. When Mrs. Henderson told him that Emma Rodriguez needed to see him urgently about the janitor, he immediately cleared his schedule. Emma entered the principal's office and sat in the large chair across from his desk, her small feet barely touching the floor. Principal Davies had always made her feel comfortable, treating her questions and concerns as if they were just as important as those of the adults who usually sat in that same chair. "What's on your mind, Emma?" he asked kindly. "Mrs. Henderson says this is about Mr. Thompson." The words poured out of Emma in a rush. She told Principal Davies about the woman in the expensive coat who had laughed at Mr. Thompson's uniform. She described how the other parents had stood around listening and how Mr. Thompson had looked so sad and embarrassed. She explained how the woman had said the uniform was fake and disrespectful to real soldiers. "She made it sound like Mr. Thompson was pretending to be a soldier," Emma said, her voice getting stronger as she spoke. "But I know he's not pretending. I can tell by the way he looks at the flag and how he acts around the veteran pictures. In the hallway, My daddy is a soldier too, and Mr. Thompson reminds me of him. Real soldiers have a special way about them, and Mr. Thompson has that way. Principal Davies listened carefully to every word. He had hired Marcus Thompson 3 months ago, and while the man's references were excellent and his work was impeccable, Marcus had been very private about his background. The employment application had listed previous military service, but Marcus had never elaborated on the details, and Principal Davies had respected his privacy. "Emma, I want you to know that you did the right thing by coming to me," Principal Davies said seriously. "No one should be treated the way you described, especially not someone who works so hard to keep our school clean and safe for all of you." "Can you find out if Mr. Thompson really was a soldier?" Emma asked hopefully. "I want to prove that lady was wrong. I want everyone to know that Mr. Thompson is a hero, not someone to laugh at." Principal Davies promised Emma that he would look into the matter. He walked her to her classroom personally, explaining to her teacher that she had been taking care of important business. As Emma settled into her seat, she felt a mixture of relief and nervous anticipation. She had done what she could to help Mr. Thompson. Now it was up to the adults to make things right. Back in his office, Principal Davies pulled out Marcus Thompson's employment file. The military service dates were listed, but there were no details about his rank, unit, or deployment history. The reference letters were glowing but came from civilian employers at his previous jobs, not military contacts. Principal Davies had served briefly in the National Guard himself during college, and he knew that many veterans were reluctant to discuss their service, especially those who had seen combat. Some carried wounds that weren't visible, and some had experiences that were too painful to share with strangers. He decided to make a phone call to the Department of Veterans Affairs. As the principal of a public school, he had legitimate reasons to verify the military service of his employees, especially if questions were being raised about the authenticity of a uniform being worn on school property. What Principal Davies discovered during that phone call would change everything. The information he received about Marcus Thompson was so extraordinary that he had to ask the representative to repeat it twice to make sure he had heard correctly. As he hung up the phone, Principal Davies realized that Emma Rodriguez had been right about more than she could have possibly known. Marcus Thompson wasn't just a veteran. He was a hero whose story needed to be told, whose service deserved recognition, and whose sacrifices had earned him the right to wear that faded uniform with more pride than any man alive. Principal Davies sat in stunned silence after ending his phone call with the Department of Veterans Affairs. The information he had received about Marcus Thompson was so remarkable that he felt compelled to verify it through additional sources. The representative had connected him with the Pentagon's Medal of Honor office, where another official confirmed details that made Principal Davies understand just how wrong Sarah Whitman had been in her cruel assessment. Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson had served 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan with the 75th Ranger Regiment, one of the Army's most elite units. His service record read like something from a military thriller novel, filled with commendations, combat citations, and acts of extraordinary bravery that had saved countless lives. The phone rang again, and Principal Davies found himself speaking with Colonel Patricia Mills, Marcus's former commanding officer, who had been located through military channels. Her voice carried a mixture of surprise and concern when she learned that Marcus was working as a school janitor and that his service was being questioned. "Marcus Thompson is one of the finest soldiers I've ever had the privilege to command," Colonel Mills said firmly. "That man earned every ribbon, every medal, and every stripe on his uniform through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. If someone is questioning his right to wear that uniform, they have no idea who they're dealing with." She went on to describe the mission that had changed Marcus's life forever. It had been a routine patrol in a dangerous region of Afghanistan when Marcus's unit came under heavy fire from enemy fighters positioned in the mountains above their convoy. An improvised explosive device had destroyed one of their vehicles, leaving several soldiers trapped and wounded in the twisted metal, while enemy gunfire rained down around them. Most soldiers would have taken cover and called for backup, Colonel Mills explained. Marcus ran directly into enemy fire not once but 3 times to pull his wounded teammates to safety. He carried 2 unconscious soldiers on his back while bullets were hitting the ground around his feet. The medic said those men would have died if Marcus hadn't reached them when he did. During the third rescue attempt, Marcus had been hit by shrapnel from a rocket-propelled grenade. The explosion had thrown him 15 feet and left him with internal injuries, a severe concussion, and damage to his spine that would plague him for the rest of his life. Despite his injuries, he had continued to provide covering fire for the medical evacuation helicopter until every wounded soldier was safely aboard. The doctors weren't sure he would walk again, Colonel Mills continued. Marcus spent 8 months in military hospitals going through surgery after surgery and rehabilitation that would have broken most men. But he fought his way back to his feet because he wanted to return to his unit, to continue serving with his brothers. The injuries had ended Marcus's military career, but not before he had been awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action, the Purple Heart for wounds received in combat, and the Combat Infantryman Badge for exemplary conduct in ground combat. His uniform, the same one that Sarah Whitman had mocked, carried ribbons representing years of honorable service in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. That faded uniform has more history and honor attached to it than most people will accumulate in their entire lives, Colonel Mills said with emotion in her voice. Marcus never talked about his decorations or his service because that's the kind of man he is. He doesn't seek recognition or praise. He just does what needs to be done, whether it's saving lives in combat or keeping a school clean so children can learn in a safe environment. Principal Davies learned that Marcus had struggled with his transition to civilian life, as many combat veterans do. The physical pain from his injuries was manageable most days, but the invisible wounds were harder to treat. He had nightmares about the friends he couldn't save, anxiety in crowded places, and difficulty connecting with people who had never experienced the intensity of combat or the brotherhood that forms between soldiers who have faced death together. The janitorial job at Jefferson Elementary had been more than just employment for Marcus. It was therapy, a way to feel useful again, to serve his community in a different but meaningful way. The quiet hallways and the innocent laughter of children provided a peaceful environment where he could slowly heal from wounds that went deeper than the scars on his body. "I need to ask you something important," Colonel Mills said as their conversation continued. "How is Marcus doing? We've been worried about him. After he was medically discharged, he kind of disappeared. Some of us have been trying to find him because there's something he needs to know." Principal Davies described Marcus's work at the school, his quiet demeanor, and his dedication to keeping the building clean and safe. He mentioned that Marcus seemed to be living modestly, and that he had noticed the man sometimes appeared to be in physical discomfort, probably related to his injuries. "There's more to this story," Colonel Mills revealed. Marcus's actions during that mission in Afghanistan didn't just save the lives of the soldiers in his unit. The intelligence they were carrying when they were ambushed led to the capture of a high-value terrorist target and prevented a planned attack on a civilian hospital. The ripple effects of his bravery saved hundreds of innocent lives, including women and children. She paused, and Principal Davies could hear papers rustling in the background. "We've been trying to reach Marcus because the Army wants to upgrade his Silver Star to the Distinguished Service Cross, and there's talk of recommending him for the Medal of Honor. His story has been reviewed by the Pentagon, and they believe his actions meet the criteria for the nation's highest military decoration." Principal Davies felt his hands shaking as he processed this information. The quiet man who emptied trash cans and mopped floors in his school was potentially one of America's greatest living heroes, and he was being mocked by a parent who couldn't see past the surface of his faded uniform. "I think it's time people knew who Marcus Thompson really is," Principal Davies said with determination. "Can you help me make that happen?" Colonel Mills didn't hesitate. "I'll make some calls. It's about time Marcus got the recognition he deserves, whether he wants it or not. Some stories are too important to keep quiet." News traveled fast in the small community surrounding Jefferson Elementary School, especially when it involved one of their own being recognized for extraordinary service to the country. By noon, Principal Davies had received calls from the local newspaper, 2 television stations, and the mayor's office, all wanting to know more about the war hero who had been working quietly in their midst. Colonel Mills had been true to her word, making calls that reached all the way to the Pentagon. Within hours, Marcus Thompson's story was being discussed in military circles and veteran organizations across the state. The local Veterans of Foreign Wars post was already planning a ceremony, and the American Legion had offered to provide a color guard for any recognition event the school might organize. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his work, unaware of the storm of attention brewing around him. He spent his lunch break in the small storage room that served as his office, eating a peanut butter sandwich and reading a paperback novel he had found in the school's lost and found box. The physical pain in his back was particularly bad that day, probably due to the stress of the morning's humiliation, but he pushed through it as he always did. A soft knock on the door interrupted his quiet meal. Emma Rodriguez stood in the doorway, looking nervous but determined. She had gotten permission from her teacher to deliver a message to the janitor's office, though her real purpose was to check on the man who had been treated so unfairly. "Mr. Thompson," Emma said quietly, "are you okay? I saw what happened this morning with that mean lady." Marcus looked up from his sandwich, surprised to see the young student. Emma was one of the children who always said hello when they passed in the hallways, and she had a mature way of speaking that reminded him of his younger sister back home. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Marcus said with a gentle smile. "Don't worry about me. Some people just have opinions and that's their right." Emma stepped closer, her backpack clutched tightly in her small hands. "My daddy is a soldier too," she said. "He's deployed right now, and my mom always tells me how proud we should be of people who serve our country. That lady was wrong to say those things about your uniform." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. This child's simple words of support meant more to him than she could possibly understand. In a world where he often felt invisible and forgotten, Emma's recognition of his service was like a warm light cutting through the darkness. "Thank you, Emma," he said softly. "That means a lot coming from a military family. Your dad is lucky to have such a thoughtful daughter." "I told Principal Davies what happened," Emma confessed, her cheeks turning slightly pink. "I hope that's okay. I just thought someone should know that you were being treated unfairly." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of multiple footsteps echoed down the hallway. Principal Davies appeared in the doorway, followed by a group of people Marcus didn't recognize. Among them was a woman in a military dress uniform whose bearing and decorations immediately identified her as a high-ranking officer. "Marcus, Principal," Davies said with an unusual formality in his voice, "I'd like you to meet some visitors who have come a long way to see you." Colonel Mills stepped forward, and Marcus immediately stood to attention, his military training taking over despite his civilian clothes and humble surroundings. He recognized her voice from phone conversations during his service, though they had never met in person. "At ease, Sergeant Thompson," Colonel Mills said with a warm smile. "It's an honor to finally meet you face to face." The small storage room suddenly felt crowded with visitors, including a reporter from the local newspaper, a representative from the mayor's office, and the commander of the local VFW post. Emma pressed herself against the wall, sensing that something important was happening but not wanting to leave. "Marcus, we need to talk," Colonel Mills continued. "There are some things you need to know, and some recognition that's long overdue." She began by explaining the upgrade of his Silver Star to the Distinguished Service Cross, a decoration second only to the Medal of Honor in recognizing extraordinary heroism in combat. Marcus listened in stunned silence as she described the investigation that had led to this decision and the testimony from the soldiers whose lives he had saved. "But that's not all," Colonel Mills said, her voice filled with pride and emotion. "The Pentagon has recommended you for the Medal of Honor. The process is still ongoing, but your actions on that day in Afghanistan meet every criterion for our nation's highest military decoration." The reporter was frantically taking notes, while the VFW commander wiped tears from his eyes. Principal Davies watched Marcus's reaction carefully, seeing the man struggle to process information that seemed to overwhelm him. "I don't understand," Marcus said quietly. "I was just doing my job. Any soldier would have done the same thing." "No, Marcus," Colonel Mills replied firmly. "Not every soldier would have run into enemy fire 3 times to save his teammates. Not every soldier would have continued fighting while wounded and bleeding. What you did was extraordinary, and it's time the world knew about it." Emma listened from her corner with wide eyes, finally understanding why Mr. Thompson had always seemed special to her. The kind man who had helped her with her locker and cleaned up her spilled lunch was a real hero, someone who had risked his life to save others. The VFW commander stepped forward with a presentation box in his hands. "Sergeant Thompson, on behalf of all veterans in this community, I want to present you with this new dress uniform. It's our way of saying thank you for your service and welcome home." Marcus opened the box with shaking hands, revealing a crisp new army dress uniform complete with all his ribbons and decorations properly mounted. The fabric was deep blue with gold trim, and every button gleamed like a mirror. It was beautiful, perfect and completely different from the faded work uniform he had been wearing. "We also want to organize a proper ceremony," the mayor's representative added. "The whole community should hear your story and have a chance to thank you for your service." Marcus looked around the room at all the faces watching him expectantly. He saw Emma's encouraging smile, Principal Davies's supportive nod, and the respect in the eyes of his fellow veterans. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible or forgotten. "I don't know what to say," Marcus admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I never expected anything like this." "Say you'll let us honor you properly," Colonel Mills replied. "It's time to stop hiding in the shadows, Marcus. Your story needs to be told, and your service needs to be recognized." Outside in the school parking lot, Sarah Whitman was just arriving to pick up her younger daughter from kindergarten, completely unaware that her cruel words that morning had set in motion events that would soon make her the most embarrassed woman in the entire community. The news of Marcus Thompson's heroic service spread through the community like wildfire. By the time school ended that afternoon, the story had been picked up by regional news outlets and was already being shared on social media. The small town that had barely noticed their humble school janitor was suddenly buzzing with excitement about the war hero who had been living and working among them. Principal Davies had scheduled an emergency assembly for the next morning, giving parents and community members the opportunity to attend a proper introduction to the man they had overlooked for months. The local high school's ROTC program volunteered to provide a color guard, and the mayor declared it an official day of recognition for veterans in the community. That evening, Marcus sat in his small apartment staring at the new dress uniform hanging in his closet. The transformation from invisible janitor to celebrated hero felt surreal and overwhelming. He wasn't sure he was ready for the attention that was coming his way, but Colonel Mills had made it clear that his story was bigger than his personal comfort. The next morning arrived with unusual energy at Jefferson Elementary. Cars filled the parking lot an hour before the assembly was scheduled to begin, and local television crews set up equipment outside the main entrance. Veterans from across the county had driven in to show their support, many wearing their own dress uniforms and service medals. Inside the school, Marcus stood in front of the bathroom mirror adjusting his new uniform. Every ribbon was perfectly aligned, every button polished to perfection. The fabric fit him better than his old uniform ever had, and the weight of his decorations on his chest reminded him of the responsibility that came with wearing them. Emma Rodriguez found him there, having convinced her teacher to let her check on Mr. Thompson before the assembly began. She looked up at him in his dress uniform with a mixture of awe and satisfaction, knowing that she had played a role in bringing the truth to light. "You look like a real soldier now," she said with a bright smile. "I always was a real soldier, Emma," Marcus replied gently. "The uniform doesn't make the soldier, the actions do." "I know," Emma said seriously. "That's why I told Principal Davies about what happened. I could see it in your eyes, the same look my daddy has when he talks about serving our country." As they walked toward the auditorium together, Marcus felt a calmness he hadn't experienced in months. The anxiety about being in front of crowds, the worry about people judging him, all of it seemed less important now. He was surrounded by people who understood the value of service and sacrifice. The auditorium was packed beyond capacity, with standing room only along the back wall. Parents, teachers, students, and community members filled every seat. Local veterans sat in a special section near the front, their own service ribbons catching the light as they waited to honor one of their own. Principal Davies took the podium and called for quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today to correct a terrible misunderstanding and to give proper recognition to a man who has served our nation with extraordinary courage and dedication." He began by reading from Marcus's service record, describing his 3 tours of duty with the elite 75th Ranger Regiment and his numerous commendations for valor in combat. The audience listened in respectful silence, many parents realizing for the first time that they had been walking past a genuine war hero every day without knowing it. But the most important part of Sergeant Thompson's story, Principal Davies continued, is not the medals he earned or the recognition he received from the military. It's the lives he saved through his selfless actions under enemy fire, and the quiet dignity with which he has continued to serve this community. When Marcus was called to the podium, the entire auditorium rose in a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. Children who had only known him as the friendly janitor looked at him with new understanding, while adults who had barely acknowledged his existence applauded with genuine respect and admiration. Marcus stood at the microphone, looking out at the sea of faces, and took a deep breath. "I want to thank Principal Davies and all of you for this recognition, but I also want to say something important. The uniform I wore to work yesterday, the one that some people thought looked old and worn out, was the same uniform I wore in Afghanistan when I served alongside the finest soldiers our country has ever produced." He paused, his eyes finding Sarah Whitman in the audience. She sat frozen in her seat, her face pale with embarrassment as she realized that everyone in the room knew about her cruel comments from the day before. "That uniform was faded because it had been through 3 combat deployments," Marcus continued. "It was mended because it had been torn by shrapnel from enemy explosives. It was worn thin because I wore it while carrying wounded soldiers to safety and while fighting to protect the freedoms we all enjoy today." The auditorium was completely silent, everyone hanging on his words. "I don't tell you this to make anyone feel bad or to seek sympathy," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger. "I tell you this because every veteran in this room, whether they served in combat or not, whether their uniform is new or old, has earned the right to wear it with pride. We don't serve for recognition or praise. We serve because we believe in something bigger than ourselves." Colonel Mills stepped forward and presented Marcus with his Distinguished Service Cross, explaining to the audience that it was the nation's 2nd highest military decoration and that Marcus was being recommended for an even greater honor. The VFW commander spoke about the brotherhood of veterans and the importance of recognizing service when they encountered it. But the most powerful moment came when Emma Rodriguez was invited to the stage. The 8-year-old girl who had started this entire chain of events by refusing to stay silent about injustice walked confidently to the microphone. "Mr. Thompson," she said in her clear young voice, "I want everyone to know that you are the kindest person in this whole school. You always help students when we need it, and you make our school a safe and clean place to learn. I'm sorry that lady was mean to you yesterday, but I'm glad everyone knows now what a hero you really are." The audience erupted in applause again, and Marcus knelt down to give Emma a gentle hug. As he looked out at the crowd, he saw Sarah Whitman quietly leaving through the back door, unable to face the consequences of her thoughtless cruelty. The assembly concluded with the presentation of a key to the city and a proclamation declaring Marcus Thompson an honorary citizen and community hero. Local businesses had already begun offering him job opportunities that would pay better than his janitor position, but Marcus politely declined them all. "I like working at the school," he explained to the reporters who interviewed him afterward. "These children are our future, and keeping their environment clean and safe is important work. There's honor in all honest labor, whether you're wearing a uniform or not." As the crowd began to disperse, Marcus realized that his life had changed forever. He was no longer invisible, no longer forgotten. But more importantly, he had learned that there were people like Emma Rodriguez in the world, people who saw past the surface to recognize the worth and dignity in every person they met. 6 months after the assembly that changed everything, Jefferson Elementary School had transformed into something resembling a shrine to service and heroism. Marcus Thompson's story had inspired a wave of community involvement that surprised everyone, including Marcus himself. The school now hosted regular visits from veterans who shared their stories with students, and a memorial garden had been planted in honor of all local service members. Marcus continued working as the school janitor, but his role had evolved far, beyond cleaning classrooms and emptying trash cans. He had become an unofficial mentor to students, especially those from military families who understood the unique challenges of having parents deployed overseas. His small storage room office had been converted into a proper space where children could come to talk about their worries or get help with their problems. The most significant change, however, was in how the community viewed service in all its forms. Marcus's story had taught them to look beyond appearances and to recognize that heroism often came in quiet, humble packages. The local newspaper ran a weekly feature called Everyday Heroes that highlighted community members who served others without seeking recognition. Emma Rodriguez had become something of a local celebrity herself, invited to speak at schools and community events about the importance of standing up for what's right. She carried herself with the same quiet confidence that had driven her to defend Mr. Thompson, and her friendship with the war hero had deepened into something resembling a grandfather-granddaughter relationship. The most dramatic change of all had come to Sarah Whitman, though not in the way anyone expected. The humiliation of being exposed as the woman who had mocked a war hero had initially driven her into hiding. For weeks after the assembly, she avoided school events and community gatherings, too embarrassed to face the judgment of her neighbors. But shame has a way of either hardening people's hearts or opening them to change, and Sarah chose the harder path of genuine transformation. She began volunteering at the local Veterans Center, initially as a way to make amends for her cruel words, but gradually discovering a purpose she had never known she was missing. Marcus had been the one to suggest she visit the Veterans Center. When she finally worked up the courage to approach him with an apology, he had seen the genuine remorse in her eyes and recognized that her mockery had come from ignorance rather than malice. His response to her tearful apology had been characteristically gracious. "Everyone makes mistakes," he had told her simply. "What matters is what we do after we realize we were wrong." Sarah threw herself into her volunteer work with the same intensity she had once devoted to social climbing. She organized fundraising events, coordinated meal deliveries to elderly veterans, and helped establish a support group for military spouses dealing with deployment stress. Her transformation was so complete that she eventually became the center's volunteer coordinator. The day that would be remembered as the culmination of Marcus's story arrived on a crisp autumn morning when a convoy of black cars pulled up to Jefferson Elementary School. Principal Davies had received a call from Washington, D.C. the previous week, informing him that the President of the United States would be making an unannounced visit to Present Sergeant Marcus Thompson with the Medal of Honor. The ceremony was kept small and intimate, with only Marcus's closest friends and supporters in attendance. Emma Rodriguez sat in the front row next to Colonel Mills, both of them wearing their best clothes for the occasion. Sarah Whitman was there too, invited by Marcus himself as a symbol of forgiveness and redemption. As the president placed the Medal of Honor around Marcus's neck, the highest decoration a grateful nation could bestow, he spoke words that brought tears to every eye in the room. This medal represents not just one moment of extraordinary courage, but a lifetime of quiet service and selfless dedication to others. Sergeant Thompson embodies the very best of American values, both in uniform and out. The president went on to describe how Marcus's actions in Afghanistan had prevented a terrorist attack that would have killed hundreds of innocent civilians, making him not just a hero to his fellow soldiers, but to people around the world who would never know his name. The ripple effects of his courage had saved more lives than anyone had initially realized. After the ceremony, as photographers captured images that would appear in newspapers across the country, Marcus found himself surrounded by the people who had changed his life and been changed by him in return. Emma beamed with pride as she stood next to her hero, while Sarah Whitman waited patiently for a chance to congratulate the man she had once mocked. "I owe you an apology that can never be adequate," Sarah said when her turn came to speak with Marcus. "But more than that, I owe you thanks for showing me what real character looks like." Marcus smiled and shook her hand warmly. "You don't owe me anything, Sarah. You've shown more courage in changing your life than most people show in their entire lives. That takes real strength." The local news coverage of the Medal of Honor presentation focused not just on Marcus's wartime heroism, but on the lessons his story had taught the community about looking deeper than surface appearances and recognizing the dignity in every person's contribution to society. As the day wound down and the crowds dispersed, Marcus returned to his small apartment, still wearing his dress uniform with the Medal of Honor gleaming on his chest. He carefully hung the uniform in his closet next to his old, faded work uniform, both representing different chapters of the same story of service and sacrifice. The next morning, Marcus would return to work as the janitor at Jefferson Elementary School, because that was where he felt he belonged. He would continue to empty trash cans and mop floors and help children with their problems, because he understood that true heroism wasn't about recognition or medals. It was about showing up every day and doing what needed to be done, whether anyone was watching or not. The faded army uniform that had started it all hung cleaned and pressed in his closet, no longer a source of embarrassment, but a symbol of the journey that had brought him home. And in the end, that journey had taught an entire community that heroes walk among us every day, often invisible until someone like Emma Rodriguez has the courage to see them for who they really are. The story of Marcus Thompson became a legend in their small town, passed down from parents to children as a reminder that we should never judge people by their appearance, and that sometimes the most extraordinary people are hiding in the most ordinary places. It was a lesson that would echo through generations, all because one little girl refused to stay silent when she witnessed injustice, and one humble man finally received the recognition he had never sought but richly deserved.